Yeah, you know what? Let me press you on that just a little bit. Just a little bit. What makes you think that the Vaticanus manuscript represents a first century text in the Gospels?
There's one really important thing for textual
Yeah.
criticism that comes out of this,
Yeah.
and that is that as I was looking at Vaticanus, I noticed that the Gospels have virtually no periods at the end of sentences. It's usually a raised dot, but
Right.
every sentence in every epistle has a period at the end of the sentence. 100%.
Well, that's interesting.
Why would the same scribe put a period after every sentence in every epistle, but not put them after every sentence in the Gospels? Well, the answer is the scribe was trained not to change the text of the exemplar manuscript.
Right.
And so it indicates that the Gospels were copied from such a primitive copy of the Gospels that it had virtually no periods at the end of sentences. But the epistles were copied from a later manuscript after the addition of period. Well, I thought, how is there any other indication that the Gospels in Vaticanus are earlier than the epistles? And I compared the text of the Gospels in Vaticanus to the text of the Gospels in P75. That's the Bodmer papyrus that Bruce Metzger dated to between 175 and 225.
Hmm.
And it turns out that P75 has a sentence, has a period after every sentence.
Right.
Furthermore, the cases where Vaticanus has an older spelling, so it has the epsilon iota instead of just the iota.
Right.
Vaticanus has only half as many Nomina Sacra forms, the holy names of God, where
Right.
Jesus is abbreviated with
Hmm.
iota sigma,
Yeah.
theos is theta sigma, and so forth, with a bar over it. Well, there are twice as many Nomina Sacra forms in P75 than there are in Vaticanus. Well, we
Right.
know that over time, the number of words that were added for these abbreviations grew. So
Right.
this is another indication that the text of Vaticanus is earlier than P75.
Hmm.
Furthermore, at every point where Vaticanus, there are 13 in the Gospels of Vaticanus, at every point that Vaticanus has this two dot and a bar symbol, both the Nestle-Aland text and the UBS text agree that the Vaticanus text is earlier than P75.
Right.
And to me, the most important evidence is this, that there's one case where you have the two dot and a bar in the epistles. And in it, the added text is in Vaticanus's text, just like the 121 in the Septuagint of
Right.
prophetic books of Vaticanus are in the Vaticanus text. See, the scribe in copying the manuscript did not change the text. If the text had an obelus, the obelus was preserved. If it didn't, it did not have one, even if the
Hmm.
scribe knew that these 12 cases actually do have added text in the Septuagint that's not in the Hebrew. The
Right.
scribe did not add the obelus, but rather said this text is not. This, by the way, it shows the scribe B knew enough Hebrew to distinguish cases where the Septuagint added text. Of the 13 in the Gospels, however, where you have this two dots and a bar, not one of them has even one word of the 4+ consecutive words that were added in other manuscripts.
Right.
None of the added text known to Scribe B from early manuscripts was in the text of the exemplar being copied.
Hmm.
That must have been a really early exemplar, because
Right.
here's Scribe B with access to far more New Testament texts than everything we have put together, hence with a knowledge of a lot of these multi-word texts, multi-word editions, and yet not one of them in the Gospels is in the Vaticanus text. I
Right.
argued in my New Testament Studies article that came out that the text of all four Gospels in Vaticanus should be dated to the AD 100s, even though Vaticanus itself was written far later. So one of the really important implications of my findings is evidence that we have in Vaticanus a text of the Gospels that is that should be dated, even though it's written 325 to 350, should be dated to the 100s AD.
Right. And I'm assuming you are going into detail in the book there, because that's quite an extraordinary claim, right?
It is.
So yeah, I would like to press you further on that claim.
Yeah, no, I can
Yeah,
identify specific cases where the text of Vaticanus in the Gospels is not the original text.
sure.
And of course, my statement excludes any cases where the original scribe B inadvertently made a mistake in copying the text.
I'm just processing that, because that's a huge claim, right? If you're talking about the Vaticanus going, and this is just the Gospels, right? You're not talking about the epistles.
No,
No,
in fact,
just the
I argue
Gospels.
specifically the epistles is later because the one distigma obelus in the epistles uh, is the added text that's marked as added text is in the Vaticanus text.
Yeah, you know what? Let me press you on that just a little bit. Just a little bit. What makes you think that the Vaticanus manuscript represents a first century text in the Gospels?
Number
What are
one,
some of the key points for that?
okay, number one, in all 13 cases where the scribe of Vaticanus puts an obelus marking added text, and where we know the added text has survived in manuscripts, none of those editions are in Vaticanus. And because we know
Okay.
that Vaticanus did not take away from the exemplar manuscript, we know that the exemplar, or at least we have strong confidence that the exemplar being copied did not have that added text.
Right. Because of the obelus.
Yes, and the key thing is, because there are 13 of these, all of which have a gap in the text that only the original scribe could leave, because all 13 of them are not in the Vaticanus text, the text that's being that we have today in Vaticanus is, apart from inadvertent copy errors, text that goes back to that early text before the addition of periods, which is very early,
Yeah.
before the spelling changes from epsilon iota iota,
Yeah.
before the expansion of Nomina Sacra forms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just these observations of actual facts in the text, but where the text critical scholars assess the comparisons between P75 and Vaticanus, they choose the Vaticanus text as the earlier text. So
Right.
if now Metzger may not have been right. Maybe he misstated P75. Maybe it's not 175 to 225. Maybe it's the early 200s.
Right.
But I'm saying we have all these evidences that the text of Vaticanus is substantially earlier than P75's text. And that
Right.
puts it in the AD 100s.
Very
And by the way,
interesting.
those people that denigrate the evidence for the distigma obelus, or as I will explain when we get to the recent research, uh,
Yeah.
just the obelus, because it doesn't matter whether the original scribe of Vaticanus did both the distigma and the obelus. What matters is that the obelus is by the original scribe. So if one denigrates that, says there's no obelus in the New Testament or no distigma obelus, one is taking away evidence for our Gospels in Vaticanus being from the 2nd century.